The report that we've been talking about has been released. It really is a bunch of mumbo jumbo. And it's fascinating to see how it's running interference for the Israeli government and the U.S. government's providing of weapons. But here is Blinken speaking with Margaret Brennan. And this is coming in the wake of reports from the Times of Israel that both the top Israeli generals and the head of Shin Bet are now either leaking or speaking to the press about what a disaster this Gaza excursion is turning into, and the fact that there does not appear to be any type of end game being articulated by Israeli leadership. No end game and no strategy. And so the Israeli army apparently now is simply on its own, continuing to fight and look to engage Hamas where they can find it. And the fighting is restarted in the north, I guess, because there is no plan. It's just been have the army run around Gaza, killing people. And so Blinken obviously must be aware of this. And for whatever reason, I don't think it's a coincidence that it is being introduced in the Israeli press a couple of days ago. And now Blinken is sort of talking in the same way.
About the way they're used. But here's something else that's critically important, Margaret. We believe two things. One, you have to have a clear, credible plan to protect civilians, which we haven't seen. Mm-hmm. Second, we also need to see a plan for what happens after this conflict in Gaza is over. And we still haven't seen that, because what are we seeing right now? We're seeing parts of Gaza that Israel has cleared of Hamas, where Hamas is coming back, right, including in the north, including in Khan Yunis. As we look at Rafah, they may go in and have some initial success, but potentially at an incredibly high cost to civilians, but one that is not durable, one that's not sustainable. And they will be left holding the bag on an enduring insurgency, because a lot of armed Hamas will be left, no matter what they do in Rafah. Or if they leave and get out of Gaza, as we believe they need to do, then you're going to have a vacuum, and a vacuum that's likely to be filled by chaos, by anarchy, and ultimately by Hamas again. Yeah. So we've been working for many weeks on developing credible plans for security, for governance, for rebuilding. We haven't seen that come from Israel. We've been working with Arab countries and others on that plan. Mm-hmm. We need to see that too. We have the same objective as Israel. We want to make sure that Hamas cannot govern Gaza again. We want to make sure it's demilitarized. We want to make sure that Israel gets its leaders. That's what we're determined to do. We have a different way, and we think a more effective, durable way of getting that done. We remain in conversation with Israel about exactly that.
Mr. Secretary, I just want to note that there is still the, and I welcome his shift in tone because of what it may indicate behind the scenes. But there is no conversation about what Palestinians want for their future. We are working with other Arab nations. We're working with the Israeli government, the government that we will impose on the Palestinian people. And that's just taken for granted by Margaret Brennan and by most of the people in the press.
It really is shocking.
As we talk about democracy.
They don't even need to float the idea of and we're even thinking about maybe like a commission of Palestinians.
Let's
not even them. But it is, he's contradicting himself just even in the context of that interview, because it's quite clear that Israel does not share the same goals, and I'm not even sure that I share the same goals that Blinken does. But this is not goal oriented.
Right.
This is
there is
perpetual.
A goal. There's
it
a goal.
is perpetual. It is to not have it end.
Yeah.
And to have it simply just create a sort of a perpetual motion machine in Gaza, where their military just keeps bouncing around in there and immiserating and flattening Gaza.
Process oriented, they call it.
And a way of justifying the cutoff of aid, because the aid situation is really desperate now.
I saw this morning that the hospitals could be shutting down, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, or within, quote, a few hours because they have no fuel left.
No fuel. There's no water. Tomorrow on the program, Mohammed, who came on, I guess it was now about a month and a half ago,
right?
Who is Palestinian living in Belgium, I believe, raising money for his family. And about 3/4 of his family were able to escape to Egypt because of, frankly, in a large part, help of this audience. And he's going to come on to give us an update. I believe his brother and his father, maybe one other of the family, are still stuck in Rafah. They couldn't leave because the gate was closed. And he's been in touch, and I have like about 2 or 3 seconds of video of where they're living in a tent on the beach at the moment. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Meanwhile, Josh Paul, you remember, he is the former State Department official who had resigned over, and I think he was one of the first resignation.
Yeah.
Specifically, he worked in the part of the State Department that assessed whether weapons were being used by countries that we've sold them to in a way that is contrary to international or U.S. law. And he saw that there was no interest in the State Department to really make this assessment, at least in terms of like the leadership. Here he is reacting to the report that came out. And the report says something that I like. It's not unreasonable to say that Israel is in violation of U.S. or international law. So in other words, we're not willing to call you crazy if you really see what's going on. But that's about as far as we're going to go.
We can't. They didn't give specific instances because that would, and they also made the laughable claim that they're not blocking humanitarian aid, which we know is patently false because the U.S. had to airdrop aid in and build a port. But they're also, if they were to say specific instances, that would trigger the Leahy law, and then they would be openly violating international law if arms went to Israel.
So let's drag our feet on that.
Yeah, and it says it's likely they used U.S. supplied weapons in violation of international law. But go ahead.
I think it is a self-contradictory report in many ways. It does say that it is reasonable to assume that U.S. weapons have been used to commit violations of international humanitarian law, and yet it does not say that Israel has violated international humanitarian law. It does say that Israel has restricted humanitarian assistance into Gaza, and yet it says that currently Israel is not restricting U.S.-funded humanitarian assistance in Gaza, which is an absurd thing to say, given that the IDF is at this moment closing and has closed for several days the Rafah crossing point. So it is clear, I think, that the administration is doing this in order to continue the flow of arms. These are American weapons. Most of the bombs are American. Most of the artillery shells, the tank shells, a significant American role in terms of the armaments being used here. In many cases, striking targets in which there was no identified military objective.
All right, we'll talk a little more about this later in the program, and again, we'll have at least a secondhand account of what's happening in Rafah from Muhammad, whose his family is, or at least parts of his family, is still stuck there.
I do just think we should mention the UNRWA decision and the way we went head over heels to have the entire Western world stop funding UNRWA based on just a suggestion. And the difference in what we demand for
Based
standard of evidence. Yeah, exactly.
Based on a lie that they said UNRWA was involved in October 7th on the day the ICJ said they were plausibly committing genocide.
Yep. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.